Welcome back, everyone. Dana, what's on tap today apart from Diet Coke? What's on tap?
Being triggered.
Mm. Would you be triggered if I told you that you had to drink Diet Pepsi instead? Just kidding.
I was triggered all last week when I was forced to drink Diet Pepsi rather than Diet Coke because I didn't have, because I don't go to the grocery store much for lots of reasons. I order
Yeah.
from Amazon Fresh, which is awesome. And then they run out of stuff that's really important. So the funny thing is I had the cans, but they didn't have my bottles. And when I'm traveling, I got to have the bottles. So I was actually resorting to pouring a can inside an empty bottle at one point.
For those of you that don't know why Dana has cans and bottles, it's so that she can travel. Or if she doesn't
Yeah.
if she is gonna spill, she think her office, she always has bottles.
Yeah,
So
less
just
likely to spill. Like when I'm teaching, it's always bottles. Yeah, yeah,
she does it out of pure practicality,
yeah.
really.
And maybe triggers. If I spill, I get triggered. Like my anxiety gets triggered. It's a great segue to
What exactly is a
this kind of
trigger?
hot
Yeah.
button topic of being triggered. Because
Yeah.
I think it's gone in some circles too far
Yeah.
to saying like you triggered me and taking no onus or responsibility for being triggered, right? But
Yep.
at the same time, what are we talking about getting triggered by? And when you say you triggered me and I have no efficacy to do anything about that, I've totally disempowered myself, right?
Yep.
But there's also going to be periods of time where that is important. So, for example, now when we go to baseball games, the Mariners in Seattle here, at the beginning of it, they give a warning about visual strobing for those that are how did they say it? It's for visually sensitive
Photosensitive,
folks who
photosensitive.
photosensitivity. Yes. So they give you, and that's really good because that we know now that if you're having a strobe of any kind or a flashing light, that might even just be like fun for the game, right? For someone that has a seizure disorder, it can be the thing that triggers a seizure, right? So people that aren't aware of that might be like, oh my God, they're giving, like I heard that my sister, when she went to a game with my wife, said, oh, it's too bad they have to do that. My wife's like, ableist much? Um, I go on these little diatribes, but the idea
Love it.
is being triggered. I can remember trying to understand this topic from an interrelational lens when I was going through my own therapy. Like, what's mine? What's yours? At what point do if I trigger you? At what point is it something I've done to you versus you being the receiver and it hits you a certain way? And my partner at the time, giving a really good example, which was, okay, so if I say, well, I said something to you and you got hurt by it, that's your fault. You let yourself get hurt by that. I mean, that's like going too far with not taking responsibility for triggering someone. And he says, well, what if you hit me in the face and I start bleeding, you did that to me. And I was like, it's actually a really good point. Like, it's not that I hit him and because his nose bled, it's his responsibility. So I'm giving that example because I think that's where we see this a lot, where folks are saying, I'm getting triggered. And it becomes this asking the environment to deal and not trigger me for anything, right? Or trigger
Mm-hmm.
warning. You didn't give a trigger warning. But this may have been, I'm talking about Diet Coke. Do I really need to give a trigger warning? Versus something like a flashy lights that I know can precipitate seizures in somebody. So where do you end and I begin? And where does the onus or responsibility for that end and the other begin? So, and it's not always so clear. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's a hard, difficult, context specific, idiopathic, meaning unique
Yeah.
to each person, what triggers them and what doesn't. We are in the process now. It took us almost a year to figure out where this weird intermittent was coming in our house. It doesn't do it all the time, and it wouldn't do it for days, and then it would do it and be like, "What is it?" I thought for sure it had to be something outside. Finally, 2 weeks ago, my wife pinpointed it. We have this, it's called a pressure relief tank on our hot water heater. And they put those there. It's code here, so your hot water heater doesn't explode. If too much pressure builds up in your hot water heater, it goes to that tank and it lets the pressure out. Apparently, when they start to go bad, they start going, whoop. And my wife, being as noise sensitive as she is, it was driving her bat crazy. Oh, you might need to write that one down. Said it again. And so we can say that was triggering her like misophonia, right? Her difficulty with that sound. And sure, yes, absolutely. It's an annoying sound. It was intermittent. It's loud and a pitch that's bad enough it's not as loud and high pitch as like a smoke alarm, but and now it's slowly doing it more and more and more. It's showing up during the day and it's a lot. So I finally called and we're having the hot water heater replaced on Friday. But this idea of something in the environment that you can't control, and if you, idiopathic to her, she's more affected by that kind of stuff than I am. She's getting triggered by it. Absolutely. Right. And then last week, she's like, I can't take it anymore. And I was like, all right, I'm going to call and ask about it. And then that's what we found out. I looked up some stuff on YouTube to try to fix it myself. And I'm like, there's natural gas and hot water involved here. I probably shouldn't do that. I'm going to call somebody. And so now that we know they're coming on Friday, last night when it started again and we were sitting there, I kind of looked at her like, are you okay? And she's like, just knowing it's going to get fixed and we know what it is, I can tolerate it more. So that's a really good example of the trigger. And if she has some efficacy, the efficacy being, I know this is going to end at a certain date, we know what it is, can help tolerate that more. So there's so many things that can go into like being triggered that you might be able to control, you may not be able to control. But this blanket way of saying, I'm getting triggered with no onus or responsibility is really disempowering to yourself if you do that,
Yeah.
right? That I think it's snapping back a little bit now, but maybe 3-4 years ago, I saw it like in students that I had where it was all about, coming from high school or undergrad and saying, you're triggering me. And I'm like, yeah, but shouldn't you tell me, or what's operating in you? Shouldn't you know what your triggers are? Or if you're getting triggered, ask yourself some questions internally about what's going on and is there something I can do about that? All the way to if someone punches you in the face, you're not doing that to yourself. You get triggered, right? Someone's done that to you, and all those things in between, right?
Yeah.
And then how can you manage that? And we see this a lot in the autism community around how can I, like, headphones to block out sounds. How do I figure out a way to not get triggered by that? If you have photosensitivity, how do I wear sunglasses? How do I manage that load? If I have a particular coworker who keeps saying things that make me want to kill them, and I know killing them would not go well for lots of reasons. Insert the joke tendency here. But does that mean then maybe I go home and trauma dump about that to my wife and then I'd be done with it, right? Those kinds of things you have to realize you can't always, or you can't just yell at that person, shut up, you're driving me crazy, right? And so you have to deal with getting triggered about things. And if you find yourself getting triggered over and over and over and you have no control over those things, maybe it's time for some therapy, right? We'll see this with people that have trauma in their history and they keep getting triggered.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's time. You've had a Band-Aid on this. The wound has been festering. It is infected now. You're septic because it's been unattended for so long. That's why you're getting triggered. And let's take the Band-Aid off and debride it, put you on antibiotics, to use the metaphor. And that's a way that sort of processes through that so you're no longer being triggered or the trigger doesn't last as long, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've gone on a huge explanation of triggers.
No, I think what's great about that is that triggers in some are like anything that causes an emotional reaction in someone.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll say like an intense one, right?
Yeah.
Like it's an intense emotional
think
reaction,
of it as intent. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that is so specific to each
Mhm, mhm,
person, because what we are intensely affected by is
mhm.
tied to our own lived experiences, our
Right.
past, our memories, our life. It's really,
Yeah.
that's why it's hard to give a trigger warning for everything under the sun. I mean, like,
Oh, yeah.
it would be really challenging. And I get the big hitters, I get the big
Yeah.
T trauma stuff. Like,
Yep.
I think we all understand logically that the big T trauma stuff. So, this is another thing that I've been seeing more and more is
Mm,
in in advertising is,
mm.
like when Mother's Day and Father's Day is coming around, and like some uh,
And that
companies now,
never-ending search for a Father's Day card that doesn't say you're the best father ever.
you're like,
So you just buy a blank card? Is that what you mean? Is that what you say?
I so
It's a
in our
every
in
year it's a
our
yeah,
NeuroMarvels
yeah,
store, in our NeuroMarvels, this is of course our imaginary store. We've
yeah,
got a shirt that says JOMO, the joy of missing
yeah,
out. We
yep,
now have a shirt that says Nunya
yeah, oh, yeah, yeah,
business.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
none of your business.
We also have greeting cards that are very neutral,
Oh, yeah.
right? It could be like, you're good. No, you're not,
You're an okay dad,
you're okay.
or just dad with a thumbs up. I just like
Just an
really
emoji.
broad. Yeah.
It's just two emojis.
Or just like, dude, like, yeah, yeah, right. But I think we're cracking up at this because there's so many things that
Data,
it doesn't
this
matter how
hits the
long you
mark.
work on things.
No, I mean,
God, this is
when
just
hey,
perfect.
when
Yeah.
you do find that generic card, if you could get me one too, I'd appreciate it.
I just buy blank ones now. I just
Trader
buy
Joe's
blank
is good
ones.
for that. Trader Joe's
Oh
has some
yeah,
really
yeah, yeah,
lovely like blank cards. Anyway,
yeah. Okay.
um, what were we saying? We're talking
Triggers, trigger warnings. When you were first talking about trigger warnings, which I appreciate, so think about like ratings for movies, PG, R, R13 or whatever it is. And now TV shows, you'll see this where they'll say like graphic violence. It doesn't even just say
obviously
violence.
Dana doesn't go to the movies. R13.
What? No, sorry. I knew that didn't sound right. PG-13, right? R13. That's an
Oh
interesting
my
Freudian slip.
gosh.
R13 is my mom was getting me to R movies that I probably shouldn't have seen when I was
Yeah.
too young to see them. I could
Oh
go
my
because she was
God.
with me. Little did the people know that this is not a mother who is taking care of this child well. You shouldn't let her in here.
Yeah.
So then maybe that was that was a slip. My
Yeah.
wife actually
Maybe.
finally said the words yesterday. Your child who was really not so crazy. She actually said that. It sounds funny. We've been together for 22 years now.
Yeah.
She never actually said those words. I've never felt more validated in my life.
Yes.
It's like she actually said it, and I need to tell her that. I'm going to tell her that when we're done
Tell her,
taping.
tell her,
But
tell her
yeah,
like
yeah,
you validated my experience.
yeah,
It's so interesting that you brought up the movies because
yeah.
my husband and I went and saw Deadpool and Wolverine.
Oh yeah.
And next to me come in a family of five, with the
Oh
youngest
god.
child probably being 5 or 6.
I
Would
don't imagine it's rated for.
Oh
Is it a
my,
PG-13 movie?
that that movie is
Maybe even R.
it made me blush. Like I was like, "Oh my gosh, you literally went
Oh
there." And mind you, I'm like a prude, so maybe that I'm
yeah,
not a
but
good.
still, not probably not appropriate for a 5-year-old.
What made
Yeah.
me the most uncomfortable in the movie is that I was sitting next to a 6-year-old. That's what made
Oh
me really uncomfortable. And again, this is my own frame, so
yeah.
and then the
Well, it's a good
dad's
example of you were getting triggered, right? By your
yeah,
own stuff
I
because you're a
definitely had an emotional
psychologist, you work
reaction
with
to it.
kids. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and when the dad's like, and the kids plugging their ears and closing their eyes because it's very intense in lots of places and very gory and very
Yeah,
violent.
yeah, yeah.
And the dad said, "You got to pay attention."
Oh,
You got to
So
pay
20 years
attention.
from now, when that kid's talking to their spouse is going to say,
You
"Your
had a
child."
really beep up.
What's so interesting, though, right? So you're giving all these things are sort of like falling into place for me around triggers. It's like looking back on various things that you lived through in your upbringing and everything contribute to you're either being triggered or you're not being triggered, you could say. Like, oh, I got, and as a teenager, I was like, this is so cool. My mom's getting me to an R-rated movie. And, so maybe you just think that's normal and you're not getting triggered. And everybody around you is freaking out. And you're like, what's the problem? It could go that way as well, right? In a pathological way, in a not so good way. And then it can be, we think about triggered as it's you have this sensitivity to it, or it's something that crashes through those boundaries, like a movie like that. I was watching Black Widow again the other day for the first time in several years, and I'm like, oh, this is not a movie for really little kids. I mean, the
Yeah.
themes at the beginning of it, they lose their parents and they're being against their will spayed, for lack of a better way to put it. And there's some really heavy themes in that. And I thought if I was a little kid watching that, that would have freaked me out,
Yeah.
right? So that sense of triggers uh, are so idiopathic, maybe age related. They are getting better. I've noticed like they put smoking on one now. The things you see when they're on TV, which I think some people can say, "Oh, it's so stupid. You have to have warnings for everything," but it really is a way for us to go into those experiences in an informed, consented way, right? Like, oh, it's
Yeah.
going to have this. I don't want to necessarily do that. Or if you're a parent, you may not want your kid to see that. Those sorts of things. My nephew was taken to Jaws as a 7-year-old by his dad, and you can imagine he was
And the
terrified of
days of the
sharks for
beach
like 10
ended.
years. Yeah, yeah, right. That was not good. He was, yeah.
Right.
So that sense of how can you become aware of your own triggers so that you're not giving away your power, but also know that there are some things that are triggering that are about the person doing the triggering that aren't fair, or your environment doing the triggering that are very real, right?
Yeah.
But how can you take control of that? If I, control, if I'm controlling what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, and then my dad is saying, you need to pay attention. Now you're taking away my primary ways of coping. That's not good either, right? So this
Yeah.
idea of being triggered is a really complex idea. Anytime I have a client of mine say I got triggered, I always want to unpack that because
Yes.
it's what is
Yes.
going on there, and not judging them like, oh, stop getting yourself triggered, like,
No.
blah, blah, blah. But what is it about that? And there's a lot of layers to it. And we can talk about your efficacy or lack thereof. And when I say lack thereof, I mean like either you haven't worked on it yet or it really is out there in the world and there isn't anything you can do about it, and then coming up with a frame around that so you can cope, right?
Yep.
Um, but yeah, triggers are, I think the origin of it is based on like a gun trigger. You pull the
Yeah.
trigger to
Yep.
hurt somebody. So it's a trigger, right? Yeah.
And maybe the way to think about this is as a shared responsibility in a way. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
we have a responsibility to ourselves to know and understand our triggers and how
Yeah.
we might manage them.
Yeah.
And that we hope that our community also has some conscientiousness surrounding it as well, right?
Yeah.
Uh, how do we kind of work together, I guess, in
Yeah.
this? And it's just kind of an increased awareness across the board. And so, like anything
Yeah.
that changes, the pendulum swings drastically to the other
Yeah.
side, because this is what always
Yeah.
happens in zeitgeist changes, right? And
Yeah.
then we come somewhere to the middle eventually, but we do need to kind of swing it here all the
Yeah.
way to one side in order for us to see it. But we're all about empowerment. And I
Yeah.
love the focus on let's not remove your personal responsibility, your personal
Yeah.
efficacy
Yeah.
in meeting the world.
Yeah.
Um, and that, of course, when things are unfair and instigating, I mean, there are
Yeah.
instigating things
Like
that,
antagonizer, someone would know your
yes,
trigger and be like wanted to like siblings are terrible about this.
we're not
Oh,
talking
you're
about
afraid of
that.
this thing? Yeah,
Right.
that
We're
could,
not,
yeah.
we're like literally not. I don't think we're talking about people who are
Yeah.
intentionally trying
Right.
to
Right.
do harm. And
Right.
that could
Right.
also apply to siblings.
when they know it bothers you and they do it, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
At the end of the day, how do we empower you to know yourself so
yeah.
that you know how to manage those and get yourself out? Like, what's your, I
Right.
always talk about the escape plans. Get
Yeah,
yourself out
yeah.
of there.
That's right.
I have many clients that go watch movies, and it's not
Hmm.
uncommon for them to pick an aisle seat because they know that they've got to leave if things get too intense,
Yep.
and they'll come back, or they got to
Yep.
manage that
Yeah.
the input can be so big sometimes, but they
Yeah.
notice it on the end.
Oh, yeah. I noticed when I got home this weekend from that long conference, just watching live TV, I was agitated. And so I put on a movie I've seen a million times just to have on in the background, just needed that. I
Yeah.
needed to not worry about anything new coming across the screen,
Do you have a go-to movie that
I
like
have a I have a bunch of them, but that
you
particular
do?
day I watched the Ghostbusters, the women one from several years ago,
Yeah.
which I pretty much know by heart.
For me that would be Winter Soldier,
Oh, I love that one too. Yeah, any of
Captain
the Marvel
America.
ones can work for that. Yeah, all those
Yeah.
work for me. Yeah, I
It's
have all
maybe
those in
my
my Amazon. I've purchased all those, so I
Oh,
have
got
those.
it, got it. Yeah. Yeah, that one tends to be
Mhm.
on the background for me a lot of times that I go to, and
Yeah,
it's really funny because it's not like it's a relaxing movie in any way, shape, or form,
right,
really,
right.
but
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
funny how
another,
that works, isn't it? Just and then it sort of is like what mood you're in. Like Devil
yeah,
Wears Prada is another one I love watching.
yeah,
I don't know why, there's things about it that irritate me, but I think it is just sort of like that old friend that you know the voice, you know the cadence, you know what's going to happen, and
yeah.
it's that predictability that feels better when you're triggered. You just need to not be triggered. You need to be in a space where you know you're going to be things are going to be the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the predictability and maybe the control, like you're bringing back efficacy. And
Yeah.
that's maybe
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
episode for us to do because
Yeah.
I have a lot of clients where people would describe them as rigid. And I'm always like,
Oh, yeah.
there's a there, but
Mhm.
we can understand why.
Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
it makes
Exactly.
sense, right? Like it makes sense why we're saying the same thing or watching the same thing over and over again, or only watching a part of it
That's
or
right.
whatever.
That's
There
right.
is a reason
Yeah.
for that. That's not just mindless.
Yeah,
That's for a reason.
if you were into watching the Olympics recently, and I just read a story, if you watch the Olympics at all, you know that Snoop Dogg was there, and it was this whole thing. He went to as
It's
many events as he
hilarious.
could. And if you don't know him and Martha Stewart, yes, Martha Stewart are really good friends, which doesn't it just is so weird to think about that,
Talk
but it's
about
awesome.
dissonance, right? It's dissonance.
Yeah. He apparently is afraid of horses, and so she loves horses, and so she took him to several of the horse events. Um, and the story reading that behind that, some of the dialogue they had, she's like, Snoop, I'm going to take care of you. It'll be fine. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. And then he fed a couple of them some carrots and you really thought it was cool. He was going to put on riding boots and it felt too confining for him. So he wore these like knee height spats with tennis shoes. And I thought and she was just like, no, let's just get you outfitted that feels comfortable for you. It was such a beautiful way to like someone's trigger. I'm afraid of horses. How can you meet them and help them deal with it rather than just saying, "Oh, come on, what's wrong with you?" Or
Yeah.
like throwing them in a place with a bunch of horses and flooding them. It was such a loving sort of, "I gotcha. You'll be okay. And if you need to get away, I'll help you get away too." It's such a beautiful. What we need to run the world like that.
So basically, we've got a few things in our NeuroMarvels imaginary store.
Oh,
We've got right, we've got our shirts,
yep,
right? Our
yep,
Jomo and our Nunya shirts.
yep.
We've got maybe we've got like Snoop Martha paraphernalia somewhere. Like we
Oh, I
got it
like
like
it. Yeah, yeah,
right
yeah,
because it's that talk about balancing and meeting each other where you are or accepting each other. Dana does this for me a lot. Like she knows,
yeah,
oop, Gwen's not going to be able to close the loop on that. She knows.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
She
yeah, yeah,
knows. And then I know, like for Dana, there's just some things for Dana that I know. It's like her
yeah,
Diet
yeah,
Coke situation, bottle, can,
yeah, yeah,
upstairs,
yeah,
downstairs thing. Like these types of things that we just know,
yeah.
and then it just makes it so much to have that be validated and met instead of diminished and dismissed is
Exactly. Yeah.
incredibly beneficial. And we talked about validation in
Yeah.
and normalization in another episode. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
extremely therapeutic and reparative in many, many
Yeah.
ways. And it's
Exactly.
not an
Yep.
excuse, is
Yep.
literally helping someone feel seen and understood. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Exactly. Exactly. Good way to
yes,
put it. Yeah.
yes, yes. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for going on that circuitous
Yeah. Trigger
journey.
journey with us.
I mean, there was a moment where I was like, wait, what are we talking about? But just like Lassie at the well, we came right back
We always come back. Yeah,
to,
that's right.
we always get there no matter what the journey. Anyway, all right,
That's right.
everyone, be good to you. Take care of yourselves. All right. And we
Yes.
will catch you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.